My fiancé brought his mistress to live in our home. I pretended to go on a business trip, packed up my things in silence, and within 10 minutes of turning my back, I arranged to marry someone else. By the time he realized what happened, he went out of his mind with regret. I still remember that evening vividly. It was a night just 3 months before our wedding day. I pulled my suitcase through the front doors of our Upper East Side townhouse. In my head, I was still calculating how I would show Victor the finalized contract I had just closed. But in less than 10 minutes, I knew my Eimer 10. Life had taken an entirely different turn. Right next to the shoe cabinet in the foyer, there was an extra pair of cream-colored women's mules, embellished with elaborate designer hardware, kind of expensive footwear that, at a glance, told you the wearer valued showing off far more than practicality. They weren't mine. I froze for a beat, my hand still gripping the handle of my suitcase, and looked up at Thomas, our estate manager, who was walking out of the kitchen. He looked at me, his lips trembling slightly, his face as pained as if he had just swallowed something incredibly bitter. "Miss Tara, you're home?" It was just a normal greeting, but I heard the shift in it. Previously, everyone in this house, from the housekeeper to the driver, called me Miss Tara with a familiar, respectful tone. That day, Thomas still used the same name, but his eyes were full of sheer awkwardness. It was as if he didn't know whether I should carry my suitcase to the master bedroom or ask if I preferred a different, room. I didn't ask him a single question. For an adult, the deepest pain often lies right there, knowing exactly what is happening but trying desperately to preserve the last shred of dignity. I changed my shoes and rolled my suitcase inside. The sound of the wheels on the Prance ATWWW polished marble floor echoed sharply. The further I walked, the larger, emptier, and colder the house felt. Up on the second floor, the door to the master bedroom was slightly ajar. Before I could even touch the doorknob, the sound of a woman's laughter slipped through the narrow gap. It was that drawn-out, sickeningly sweet laugh that men mistake for vulnerability, but women only need to hear once to remember for a lifetime. "Victor, does this look good? I took forever to pick this color. It matches the bedsheets perfectly." Standing frozen outside the narrow crack of the door, I saw Mia standing by the edge of the bed. She was wearing a pale yellow silk slip dress, holding a satin robe. At her feet was an open suitcase, with cosmetics, perfumes, and skincare. Products scattered across the plush rug, it looked like an official move-in. I had slept in that bed for 2 years. I had personally picked out those slate gray silk sheets just last month. At the time, Victor had told me that changing the color scheme was about shifting our luck, preparing for our new married life. Now I understood it wasn't the luck he was changing, it was the woman. Victor leaned against the headboard, wearing his silk bathrobe, a cigarette clamped between his fingers. His expression was so dangerously calm it would make anyone shudder. He looked at Mia and said, "Light as a feather. If you like leave it there. Then, I can use the empty closet space on the other side, right?" Mia pulled open the door to the walk-in closet. Her voice dropped, playing the perfect role of the latecomer who wanted to steal everything from the one who came first, while feigning innocence. "But Tara's clothes are still in there. I'm afraid she'll misunderstand and think I'm taking her spot." The room fell silent for about 3 seconds. Then, Victor crushed his cigarette into the ashtray on the nightstand and said decisively, "You're staying here. You don't need to feel second best." In that exact moment, I clearly heard something shatter inside me. It wasn't a loud, violent crash, but a very small, incredibly deep crack, like a fracture, running across a pane of glass. At first, it's as thin as a strand of hair, but it's enough to ensure the glass will never be whole again. Mia giggled and threw herself into his arms. "You're so good to me." I remained outside the door. My hand gripped the suitcase handle so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. My nails dug into my palms until they burned. That very real physical pain snapped me fully awake. I turned away and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My tailored blazer was still crisp, my hair neatly pinned back, my lipstick perfectly intact, my heels still shining. Today, I had flown from Chicago back to New York, rushed straight from JFK into a meeting with partners, and skipped lunch just to close the Southside real estate project that Victor had been eyeing for half a year. I had thought I would come home early, share a late-night dinner with him, and I deliver the good news. I never expected him to be the one delivering news to me. First, I rolled my suitcase back downstairs. Thomas was still standing by the door, watching me, a lump visibly catching in his throat. Miss Tara, which room should I put this in? He asked which room, not should I take this up to your room? Just one sentence? Was enough to tell me that in this house, even the staff understood the master. Bedroom was no longer my place. Put it in the first floor guest room for now, I said. My voice was strangely calm. Perhaps when the pain hits a certain threshold, you lose the energy to even tremble. The first floor guest room hadn't been used in ages. The heavy drapes were drawn tight, and the air held a faint, stale scent. I sat on the edge of the bed, woke, up my phone screen and turned it off again. The clock ticked from 9:10 to 9:32. Upstairs, there were sounds of footsteps pacing. Mia was probably finishing, arranging her makeup on what used to be my vanity. I dialed a number. The person on the other end picked up very quickly but didn't speak first. That man had always been like that. A man of few words, calm, waiting for others to open their mouths. It's me, I said. I know. Kyle's voice was low, sounding like a cup of dark roast coffee left to cool in the middle of the night. I swallowed hard once, then asked directly, "Does your previous offer still stand?" Silence lingered on the line for a beat. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "Then I'll wait for you at 9 a.m. tomorrow in front of the city clerk's office." I hung up and walked over to open the curtains. Outside, the townhouse's private garden was illuminated by landscape lights. The rows of white hydrangeas lining the path were in full bloom. I had chosen those flowers myself. I had instructed the gardener on how to care for every single bed. I had even thought about planting wisteria along the patio after the wedding, because my mother always said they were resilient, easy to grow, and fragrant. Victor didn't change the flowers. He only changed the person standing beside him. My phone buzzed again. It was a new post from Mia, a mirror selfie taken at the head of the bed. She was wearing the yellow slip dress from earlier, her hair cascading down, her lips curved in a smile as thin as a razor blade. The caption was just 2 words: Safe Haven. The location tagged was our Upper East Side townhouse. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then tapped the like button. Less than a minute later, the post disappeared. She probably suddenly remembered I forgot to block me. Or maybe she didn't forget at all, but intentionally left it for me to see, just to twist the knife. But it didn't matter. I had already saved the screenshot. It wasn't just that photo. In my phone, I also had the receipt for the diamond bracelet Victor bought for Mia, the matching itineraries of his fake business trips, and several photos his assistant had quietly sent me over the past few months. I had never gone to cause a scene, never thrown a tantrum, never even cried and asked him why. Not because I was generous, but because I was waiting for my love for him to fade completely, waiting for a reason, cruel enough to make me cut the cord. Tonight, I had been given enough of both. At 6 a.m. the next morning, I changed into a deep burgundy dress, applied my makeup a little more meticulously than usual, and rolled my suitcase out of the guest room. Passing the master bedroom, I stopped and knocked. The person who opened the door was Mia. She was wearing Victor's oversized shirt, the hem reaching her mid-thigh, barefoot, barefaced, but her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Tara, you're up so early. Do you need Victor for something?" Before I could answer, Victor stepped out of the en-suite bathroom. He was tying his necktie. Seeing me, he paused for a second. "What's going on?" His tone was entirely different from the one he used with Mia. With her, it was indulgent and soft. With me, it was dry and strictly business, as if we weren't an engaged couple, but merely familiar corporate partners. I looked at him for a few seconds before speaking. "The company is sending me on a business trip to Boston for about a week." Victor frowned. "That long?" I smiled faintly. "Do you actually care?" The question made him choke on his words for a beat. Mia smoothly interjected, wrapping her arms around his bicep. "Don't worry about a thing, Tara. Have a safe trip. I'll be here at home to take care of Victor." At home. She said those 2 words so lightly, as if she were the true lady of the house. I looked straight into Mia's face for 3 seconds, then shifted my gaze back to Victor. "Then I'll leave him to you. I turned and walked toward the top of the stairs. Suddenly, Victor called out my baiting Dunasan name. Dara. I stopped and looked back. He remained silent for 2 long seconds, and finally, managed only one sentence. Drive safely. I nodded. I know. From the moment I stood in front of the door to the moment I turned away, the man who had once knelt down to propose to me only said a handful of words. Not a single word to ask me to stay, not a single explanation, and certainly not an explanation. Apology. I walked down each step, my heart growing as cold as ice water. By the time I reached the front gate, the morning sun was already up. I looked back at the Kledingsresult townhouse I once thought would be my home. On the second-floor balcony, Mia was holding a cup of coffee, looking down at me. She raised her mug as if to toast. Me goodbye. I gave a slight wave in return, but I wasn't waving at her. I was saying goodbye to the foolish years of my own life. Once I was in the back of my cab, I called David, my corporate lawyer. David, I need you to prep a prenuptial agreement for me. I need it today. The line went quiet in shock. But your wedding with Victor isn't for another 3 months. We don't need to rush. I stared blankly at the road ahead, my voice so light it felt foreign even to me. It's not for Victor. I'm signing it with someone else. I arrived at Lawyer David's office just as the clock struck 8:15. The streets of Manhattan weren't fully crowded yet. The early sunlight painted pale streaks across the glass skyscrapers, looking incredibly beautiful. But when a person's heart has gone cold, even the most beautiful scenery feels like a backdrop, placed in the wrong scene. I stepped out of the cab, holding my handbag in one hand and my suitcase in the point other, walking through the grand lobby. The rhythmic click of my heels echoed off the marble floor. Every step was incredibly steady, so steady that I surprised myself. Because if this had been me half a year ago, just the thought of leaving Victor would have made the world tilt on its axis. David was already waiting in his office. He was nearly 10 years older than me, a meticulous man of few words. For years, he had handled numerous legal documents for Victor's company, and he was also the one tasked with preparing the prenup for my upcoming wedding. When he saw me dragging my suitcase in, he frowned slightly and poured me a glass of warm water himself. Tara, is this real? I sat down across from him, placed my phone on the desk, the screen still, showing the photo of Mia in her slip dress inside my master bedroom. In the background was the corner of the bed and the designer nightstand lamp I had picked out when we moved into the townhouse. I don't joke about marriage, I said. David put on his reading glasses, stayed silent for a few seconds, and then asked, "Who is the other party?" Kyle Sterling. He looked up instantly. It was obvious he knew the name. In this city's financial and real estate circles, no one was unaware of Kyle, the head of the Sterling Group. Secretive, cold, decisive, a man who worked without leaving an inch of retreat for his rivals yet. Strangely enough, he had never been caught up in a single romantic scandal. Years ago, when I was getting my MBA, Kyle was the most famous alumni of the class above mine. Now, he was a name that even Victor couldn't mention without a hint of apprehension. Kyle actually agreed? I called him last night. David didn't pry into my personal life any further. Professionals in his line of work understood that sometimes asking too many questions only makes it harder for the person sitting across from them to maintain their composure. He opened his laptop, pulled a stack of files toward himself, and asked, "How strict do you want the terms? Completely separate assets, separate liabilities, clear financial boundaries, total transparency?" He looked at me, his voice slowing down. "Do you not trust him?" My lips curved slightly, but the smile held absolutely no joy. It's not about not trusting him. It's that I can no longer trust the concept of forever. Just as I finished that sentence, my phone buzzed. The screen displayed Victor's Enabliak's name. I stared at it for a moment, then let it buzz until it stopped. Less than half a minute later, the second call came. Then the third. David quietly slid the paperwork toward me, as if giving me something to do so I wouldn't have to look at that name anymore. I looked down at the clauses, reading them meticulously. Where things needed amending, I amended them. Where things needed adding, I added them. Outside the glass window, the sun was shining brighter, but inside my chest, everything was growing colder by the second. By the fifth call, I finally answered. On the other end, Victor didn't beat around the bush. His voice was hoarse and rushed, as if he had spent all morning chasing after something he just couldn't catch. Where are you? Where I need to be. Tara, I'm not in the mood to play guessing games with you. Hearing that felt absurd. Even at this very moment, he still thought I was throwing a tantrum. He still believed I was just acting out, waiting for him to back down and apologize. He never truly believed I was capable of walking out of his life. Then what do you want to say? Come home first. Let's talk. I turned my head to look out the glass window and saw a young couple walking across the street. The husband was holding a baby, the wife carrying a canvas tote bag, their steps slow but perfectly in sync. It was such a mundane scene, yet it made my throat tighten. Which home? I asked very softly. The other end went dead silent. I could clearly hear his breathing hitch. Perhaps it was then that Victor realized how a single word could morph into a blade. Which home? The townhouse where he moved his mistress into, or the place that used to be our home, but which he had personally erased last night? Tara. I cut him off. If you called to ask if I arrived in Boston safely, I have. If you called to talk about anything else, I'm busy. I told you to come home? Stop being so unreasonable. The moment those words left his mouth, I laughed out loud. David glanced up at me briefly, then looked back down, pretending to read his papers, politely, giving me a final shred of privacy. I'm being unreasonable? I asked back. You brought her into my bedroom, let her use my closet, sleep in my bed, and you're telling me I'm unreasonable? It's not what you think. Then what is it? Mia is just staying temporarily. I closed my eyes for a second. There are excuses so terrible that hearing them doesn't even cause pain anymore. It just feels laughable. Staying temporarily in a silk nightgown? Staying temporarily by posting a location tag from your house? Staying temporarily with a fully packed suitcase? Cosmetics and clothes shoved right into your fiancé's room? Victor's voice hardened immediately. Who gave you the right to snoop through other people's phones? Who gave you the right to pry that much? The moment those words left his mouth, I truly felt something inside me go completely ice cold. In the end, the person at fault is always an expert at flipping the script, turning the betrayed into the villain for simply discovering the betrayal. I didn't snoop. I changed the way I addressed him naturally, like cutting off an infected habit in my blood. You two made yourselves too filthy. The stench is everywhere. I'd have to smell it even if I didn't want to. He gasped for air. Tara, don't talk like that. I'm already speaking very politely. I hung up immediately after that sentence, powered off my phone, and placed it face down on the desk. David waited a few seconds before speaking up. Are you okay? I'm fine, I answered instantly, because if I hesitated even for a second, I wasn't sure if I could deliver that sentence flawlessly. By almost 9 a.m., David had printed all the paperwork. I signed where I needed to sign, my pen strokes steady, not trembling once until the very last page. When I saw the line regarding the marital relationship, my wrist paused for a fraction of a second. David pushed the folder slightly to the side, his voice lowering. Tara, it might be out of place for me to say this, but if you want to change your mind, there's still time. I looked up at him. I'm not changing my mind. Do you love the man you're about to marry? I remained silent for a few seconds. I don't know. That was the most honest answer I could give. I couldn't say I loved Kyle in the romantic sense women usually dream of, but I couldn't call this marriage a moment of pure impulse either. It was like someone drowning in the water. When they see a hand reaching out, they grab it. Not because they've fallen in love with the owner of the hand, but because they know if they don't hold on, they will sink. But deep down, I knew Kyle was no mere life preserver. He was a man of immense clarity. If he showed up, it meant he fully accepted the reality of this. As for me, if I was walking into City Hall, I couldn't do it with a let's just try and see mentality. Leaving the law firm, I didn't return to the townhouse. I took a cab straight to a small apartment in downtown LA. Wait, no, downtown Manhattan that I had bought with my own money 2 years ago. Victor knew nothing about this condo. When I bought it, I simply thought that no matter where a woman goes, who she loves, or where she lives, she should always have a place that truly belongs to her. I never expected that a careful calculation back then would become my only escape route today. Unlocking the door and stepping inside, the whole place was covered in a thin layer of dust. The blinds were drawn and the smell of fresh wood and new fabric had faded considerably. I opened all the windows to let the sunlight flood in, took off my shoes, and sat down hard on the living room floor. The space was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. The burner phone in my purse suddenly buzzed. I checked the caller ID. It was Peter, Victor's assistant. He had worked with Victor for 3 years, a sharp, sensible guy, and the same person who had quietly slipped me evidence of Mia's dirty tracks. I picked up, Tara. His voice was hushed, sounding like he was hiding somewhere, where he couldn't speak loudly. What is it? Victor threw a fit in the morning meeting, threw a whole stack of files at me. He demanded to know your flight details, your hotel, your itinerary in Boston, but we couldn't find anything. I leaned back against the sofa, watching the patch of sunlight crawling slowly across the hardwood floor. And then, did he go back to the townhouse? Mid-morning to check the security cameras? Peter hesitated, then continued, his voice dropping even lower. He watched the footage of you leaving with your suitcase at dawn. He watched it over and over. Then he went up to the master bedroom. When he found the engagement ring, you left behind, he smashed a glass ashtray against the wall. I placed my hand gently over my chest. The place that was supposed to ache only felt hollow. Did you call me just to tell me that? No. Peter took a breath. Mia is at the office. She's walking around like she owns the place. A minute ago, she told the secretarial pool to clear a private desk for her right next to Victor's office. It makes my stomach turn, so I just wanted to give you a heads up. I closed my eyes. The scene played out vividly in my mind. I didn't even need to be there to see it. Women like Mia never just wanted a man. They wanted the blank slank and HACZ. Status, the envy in other people's eyes. The thrill of stepping into a place that belonged to someone else and pretending they deserved it. Let her do what she wants, I said. The higher she climbs now, the harder she'll fall later. Peter stayed quiet for a moment before asking softly, Tara, are you really never coming back? I opened my eyes, staring at the stark white ceiling. It took a long time before I answered, no. After hanging up, I went into the bedroom, put my suitcase on the bed, and opened it. My clothes were neatly folded. Everything inside was strictly what I needed. People say when a woman leaves in anger, she forgets half her things. I wasn't like that. Last night, from the moment I closed the door to the guest room, I knew I would never go back. Therefore, I took exactly my legal documents, the jewelry my mother left me, my savings books, the property. Deeds, not one item more, not one item less. My love might have been blind. Once, but now that I was awake, I was never the type of woman to let others lead. To me by the nose. I was hanging my clothes in the closet when the doorbell rang. I walked out to open it. Outside stood Kyle. He was wearing a charcoal gray tailored suit, holding a paper bag in one hand and a brown manila folder in the other. The hallway sunlight slanted across his shoulders, making his jawline look even sharper, his gaze even deeper. This man always showed up looking like he had the entire world under control, even when someone else's life had just crumbled to pieces. I'm 5 minutes early, he said. I checked my watch. You are. Are you always this punctual? For important matters, yes. I stepped aside to let him in. Kyle crossed the threshold, placed the paper bag on the kitchen island, and looked around the small apartment. In the sunlit space, he stood there looking slightly out of place, like a man who belonged in cold, glass-walled penthouses suddenly stepping into something far too ordinary. I brought you bagels and coffee, he said. You probably haven't eaten anything decent since last night. I looked at the paper bag, and a strange lump formed in my throat, not because the food was expensive, but because during my 2 years with Victor, I took care of his every need. Yet it was incredibly rare for anyone to remember to ask if I had eaten. Kyle placed the folder down next to the food, his voice remaining even. I've prepared all the paperwork. ID, Social Security, proof of single status, and backup documents in case the city clerk needs cross-referencing. If you want to, back out, there's still time to say so. I looked up at him. Do you want me to back out? Kyle looked directly into my eyes. I want you to walk into this with a clear head. I stood completely still for a long time. I don't know why, but I smiled. It was a tired but genuine smile. I've never been as clear-headed as I am right now. Kyle nodded, as if that sentence alone was enough. He held his hand out toward me, then let's go. I stared at his hand for a few seconds. It was a large hand, with long, clean, firm fingers. There was nothing overly comforting or coddling about it, but, strangely, precisely because it wasn't trying to coddle me, it felt trustworthy. I placed my hand in his, and in that exact moment, I knew my life had truly turned the page. Kyle and I walked out of the apartment right as the clock hit 8:40 a.m. The long hallway was quiet. Sunlight slid through the glass windows, casting bright streaks across the tiled floor, making it feel like just another ordinary morning for everyone else. Except for me. This was the morning I ended one life and began another. Down in the lobby, Kyle's car was already waiting. An extended black luxury, sedan unostentatious, but one glance told you it was far from ordinary. The driver opened the door for me. Kyle stood behind me, a hand lightly holding the mouse door, waiting for me to settle in completely before walking around to the other side. It was a minuscule gesture, but it made me recall times with Victor. Mostly, I opened the doors myself. Sometimes he'd be in the middle of a business call and just give a curt nod instead of helping. The car began to move. The streets of New York were beginning to crowd, honking, cars, rushing pedestrians, the noise overlapping into a familiar urban rhythm. I looked out the window, watching coffee shops open, street vendors setting up, women walking briskly in sneakers, men dragging delivery carts. Everything continued as if nothing had happened. My world had flipped upside down, but the rest of the world hadn't. Kyle sat beside me without saying much. He held his phone, occasionally checking emails, then setting it down. He didn't ask if I was nervous, didn't ask if I wanted to change my mind. His silence wasn't coldness. It was a form of respect. As if he knew there were stretches of road a person simply had to walk alone, and no one could walk them for her. I leaned back against the leather seat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Oddly enough, I didn't feel shaky. There was a massive void in my chest, but it wasn't a void of panic. It was like the surface of a lake finally settling after a violent storm. The waves were gone, leaving only an icy stillness. Tara, Kyle called my name very softly. I turned to him. If anything unexpected happens later, just stand behind me. He said it simply, without offering any further explanation. I looked at him for a second, then nodded. Okay. It was just one word, but a very strange feeling flared up inside me. It wasn't reliance, but knowing I had something to lean on if I needed to. A feeling that, for 2 years with Victor, I kept telling myself I didn't need. But deep down, maybe I had always craved it. The car stopped in front of the city clerk's office right at 8:55 a.m. Outside the building, a few couples were already waiting. Some held bouquets, some were laughing loudly. One girl was adjusting her hair in a pocket mirror, her eyes glowing as if she were stepping into something incredibly beautiful. I stepped out of the car and stood next to Kyle. No flowers, no diamond ring, no wedding dress, just a crisp white blouse and tailored black trousers. Compared to those other girls, I probably looked more like someone showing up to sign a corporate merger than someone registering her marriage. The phone in my handbag suddenly vibrated. It was my burner phone. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. Victor. Seeing his name pop up, my heart didn't surge like before. There was only a very distant, very detached feeling, like spotting an old acquaintance across a busy street. I picked up the call. Tara, where are you? His voice wasn't as rushed as this morning, but it was heavier, weighed down by something that was slowly becoming a reality to him. Guess. I'm not in the mood for games. Me neither. I switched up my tone so naturally that even I was surprised. Perhaps when love drains away, the way you speak changes with it. The other end went silent for a second. Tara, don't blow this out of proportion. I let out a soft laugh. Blow it out of proportion? You already told me. Mia is just staying temporarily. If you want her gone, I'll make her leave. I stared straight ahead at the doors of the city clerk's office opening up, couples walking in hand. Not necessary. What do you mean? I mean, keep whoever you want to keep. It has nothing to do with me anymore. My voice was so calm it felt alien to me. He exhaled sharply into the receiver. Tara, stop saying things you haven't thought through. Do you think I'm joking? I know you're angry, but there has to be a limit to your tantrums. I closed my eyes for a second. Even now, this man still believed I was just throwing a fit. He still thought if he just gave an inch, I would come running. Back like before. Victor, I said very slowly. I am standing in front of the city clerk's office. Dead silence on the line. What are you doing there? I'm here to get married. A very long pause. I could hear the wind on his end, the sound of footsteps, and then a clattering noise, probably the phone dropping onto a desk. Tara, say that again. I said, I am here to get married. To who? I turned to look at Kyle. He stood beside me, posture perfectly straight, eyes looking forward, not interrupting, not rushing me, just waiting for the woman who was about to become his wife. Tara! Victor's voice suddenly cracked. For the first time since I'd known him, I heard total loss of control in his tone. Are you out of your mind? No, I've never been more sane. Don't do something stupid. Do you think marriage is a joke? I smiled bitterly. You brought another woman home and prepared to replace your bride 3 months before the wedding. What is marriage to you then? I told you it's not what you think. It doesn't matter anymore. Tara, listen to me. No need. I cut him off. My voice was light but definitive. Victor, from the moment you let her step into my bedroom, we were finished. Whether you agree or not, I don't need your permission. After saying that, I hung up and held down the power button. The screen went black, reflecting my face. No tears, no trembling. Only a terrifying calmness that I didn't even recognize in myself. You good? Kyle asked. I'm good. I put the phone back in my bag. Let's go. We walked inside. The waiting area wasn't massive, but the lighting was bright. Rows of chairs were neatly arranged. A few couples were filling out forms. Some were giggling, while others looked nervously at the text, terrified of making a typo. A clerk looked up at us. Here for a marriage license? Kyle nodded. Yes. She handed us the paperwork, pointing to the sections we needed to complete. I sat down, picked up a pen. Name, date of birth, social security number, address. Each line appeared clearly. When I reached the marital statuses section, my hand paused for a fraction of a second. Then I wrote down single with absolute finality. Kyle sat next to me, writing swiftly, his handwriting neat and decisive, without an ounce of hesitation. We submitted the forms and waited for our names to be called. Time moved a bit. Slower than usual, but it wasn't unbearable. I sat straight, hands resting on my low lap, looking straight ahead. Suddenly, the image of the night Victor proposed flashed in my mind. Fireworks exploding over the Hudson River. He knelt down, offered the ring, and promised me a life where I'd never have to worry. I believed him then. Thinking back, I wasn't wrong to believe. I just believed the wrong person. Kyle Sterling and Tara Harrison. The clerk's voice pulled me back to the probulus present. We stood up and walked into the inner room. The space was smaller, quieter, on the desk sat the official documents. The officiant checked our IDs one last time before pushing the papers toward us. Please review the information. If everything is correct, sign here. I looked down. My name sat right next to Kyle's. 2 parallel lines of text. A very strange feeling rushed through my heart, not happiness, but not pain either. It was a profound clarity, as if a door had slammed shut behind me, and another was opening right in front of me. I signed. Kyle signed. The official stamp slammed down, a dry, heavy thud that echoed clearly in my ears. Congratulations, you are now legally married. The clerk smiled, handing each of us a copy. I held the thick parchment in my hands, our names tied together legally. I didn't smile broadly, just a slight curve of the lips, but looking closely, my eyes no longer held the caution of the past, but a strange, liberating peace. Stepping out of the building, the bright outdoor light made me squint. It's done, Kyle said. I nodded. Yeah, just one word, but it marked the closing of an entire chapter of my life. Right then, Kyle's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then showed it to me. The caller ID was Victor. He's calling me, Kyle said. I looked at it for a second. Answer it if you want. Kyle accepted the call and put it on speaker. Kyle! Victor's voice was hoarse and desperate, stripped of all its usual arrogance. It's me. Is Tara with you? Kyle glanced at me, then replied, Yes. Put her on the phone. I don't need to. I stepped forward, speaking directly toward the phone. Victor instantly went silent on the other end. I am already married. I enunciated every word clearly. You don't need to look for me anymore. The line seemed to choke. Tara, don't be like this. I'm not being like anything. I look straight ahead. I just don't want to. Anymore. I reached out and ended the call. Kyle didn't say anything, just looked at me. For a moment, I'll take you to get breakfast, he said. I smiled faintly. Okay. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, the streets getting busier. Life kept moving. It didn't stop for anyone. I was just standing in the middle of that current, finally letting go of something I had held onto for far too long. Leaving City Hall, Kyle and I didn't go back to the apartment immediately. Instead, we stopped at a classic American diner tucked away on a side street in the Partly. Tribeca. The place was nothing special, just vinyl booths, a long formica counter, the smell of hot grease, bacon, and burnt coffee blending together to create that quintessential everyday aroma I had almost forgotten over the past 2 years. When I was with Victor, my breakfasts were usually espresso in fine bone china, perfectly sliced avocado toast, or sometimes a rushed bite in the back of a town car on the way to the office. But this morning, having just signed a piece of paper that altered the rest of my life, I was sitting in front of a heavy, ceramic mug of black coffee and a simple plate of scrambled eggs and toast. Kyle pulled a chair out for me, then sat opposite me. He ordered 2 plates of eggs over easy, bacon, hash browns, and black coffee. The diner owner seemed to recognize him, giving a brief nod before turning back to the grill, moving swiftly. You eat here often? I asked. Sometimes, Kyle replied. When I need to eat something that isn't for networking. I understood exactly what he meant. People in our position often ate not because we were hungry, but for business, for partners, for keeping up appearances. A simple meal, where you didn't have to talk, didn't have to put on an act, had become a luxury. The food arrived. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the eggs. Hot and comforting. Simple, but real. Suddenly, I realized how long it had been since I'd had a meal like this. No rushing, no doing it for anyone else. Just eating. Kyle watched me eat without asking any questions. After a while, he finally spoke. Eat slower. It's hot. I paused. It was such an ordinary comment, but it made my heart skip a beat. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. It wasn't a nagging reminder, nor was it a performative show of care. It was just a natural caution, as if my getting burned was simply a scenario he preferred to avoid. That was it. I'm not used to people reminding me like that, I said. You'll get used to it from now on, he replied softly, though he clearly wasn't joking. I didn't say anything else, just looked down and kept eating. Outside the diner, people rushed by. The roar of delivery trucks and the chatter of pedestrians were all incredibly raw, incredibly real. A stark contrast to the massive, luxurious but freezing atmosphere of the townhouse I had left. After breakfast, Kyle left cash on the table and we walked back to the car. Once, the car started moving, I asked, "Aren't you going to the office?" "I am," he answered, "but today, I took the morning for myself." He didn't look at me, keeping his eyes on the road. "For my marriage." That answer silenced me. He didn't say for you, he said for my marriage. That meant in all of this, he wasn't standing on the sidelines as a benefactor. He was an active participant. It made me feel simultaneously relieved and distinctly pressured. This wasn't a trial run. This was a real marriage. The car pulled up to my apartment building. I opened the door to get out, and Kyle stepped out as well. "I'll walk you up," he said. "You don't have to," I replied. "You still have to get to work." "I'll walk you up," he repeated. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't leave room for negotiation. I didn't argue. We stepped into the elevator together. The enclosed space hummed, quietly, the large mirrors reflecting our images. I looked at myself white, blouse, neat hair, holding the envelope with our marriage certificate. At a glance, no one would ever guess this woman had just walked out of a 2-year relationship and into a new marriage in the span of a single morning. The doors opened. We walked out. I unlocked the apartment, turned around, and asked, "Are you coming in?" Kyle looked at me for a second, then nodded. He stepped inside, scanned the clothes room, his eyes lingering on my half-unpacked suitcase, then on the sofa where I sat last night. "Did you sleep well last night?" he asked. "I did," I answered. "Slept like a rock." It was the truth. After turning off all my phones and purging every trace of Victor from my devices. I lay down and slept deeply. No nightmares. No jolting awake in the middle of the night to check if Victor was home or if he had texted, like I used to. I guess when a person finally makes a firm decision, the brain stops fighting itself. Kyle nodded. Good. He placed his folder on the counter, took out a copy of the marriage certificate, and handed it to me. Here is your copy. Keep it. I took it, glanced at it, and set it on the coffee table. You keep it. I'm not afraid of losing it. Kyle's lips twitched upward slightly, as if he caught my meaning. Not afraid of losing the paper or not afraid of losing me? I looked at him. What do you think? You aren't the type to hold on to things you don't need, Kyle said. If you still hold on to it, it means you still need it. That stopped me in my tracks. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I turned away, opened my suitcase, and started hanging up my clothes. Kyle didn't press further, nor did he linger. He just stood there for a moment before saying, I have to go. I turned back. Okay. He walked toward the door, paused, and said, I'll be coming over tonight. Tonight? I was slightly taken aback. Yes, Kyle looked at me. Newlyweds shouldn't sleep in separate houses on their first day. I stayed silent for a beat. The statement held no teasing, nor any sense of coercion. It felt like a rule he had set for himself and was simply following through with. All right, I said. Kyle nodded and left. The door clicked shut, and the apartment fell silent. Again, I stood in the middle of the living room looking around. Everything was exactly the same, but fundamentally different. Because of a single piece of paper, a signature, a decision, the entire space felt like it had changed. Ownership. I went into the bedroom and continued unpacking. Every shirt I hung up, every item I placed on a shelf, I did slowly and meticulously. Not because it needed to be perfect, but because I was reminding myself that this was where I would live. This was where I was starting over. Around 11 a.m., the doorbell rang again. I opened it to find Peter, Victor's assistant. He was wearing a wrinkled dress shirt, his hair disheveled, anxiety written all over his face. Tara. I was genuinely surprised. How did you know I was here? Peter awkwardly shifted his weight. I guessed. You mentioned this condo. Once a long time ago. I roughly remembered the neighborhood and asked the doorman downstairs. I looked at him for a few seconds, then stepped aside. Come in. Peter walked in, glanced around the apartment, then turned to me, his voice dropping. Tara, are you really never going back? I already told you. Peter clenched his fists. Victor has been out of his mind since this morning. He skipped the board meeting, refused to sign any paperwork, and has just been sitting in his office, staring at the security footage and trying to call you. I didn't say anything. He asked everyone, if anyone knew where you were, Peter continued, his voice choking up. Tara, don't you feel any pity for him? I stared at him for a long time. Pity? I repeated. Do you think I wasn't pitiful? Peter froze. I was by his side for 2 years. I managed his work, his life, things he never even had to think about. And when he brought someone else into our home, I was the last to know. I spoke slowly. Who exactly are you telling me to pity? Peter looked down, unable to speak. After a while, he looked up, his voice barely a whisper. Tara, you got married, didn't you? I didn't answer, just stared straight into his eyes. Peter sniffled, taking a deep breath. Victor knows. I wasn't surprised, he went. Ballistic, Peter said. He smashed everything in his office. He said if he couldn't find you, he would. He trailed off. He would what? I don't even want to say it. I smiled coldly. Go back. Tell him to stop acting like a child. Peter stood still for a few seconds, then nodded. Take care of yourself, Tara. He turned and left. I closed the door, leaned against it, and closed my eyes for a second. Outside, the city was still chaotic. Inside, I stood alone, but I no longer felt the crushing isolation from before. Perhaps because this time, I knew exactly where I was going. That afternoon dragged on longer than I expected. After Peter left, the condo returned to its familiar stillness. But this stillness didn't feel like last nights. If last night was a vast, terrifying void after abandoning a place I once called home, this afternoon felt like a brief intermission before stepping into an unknown future. After I finished organizing my things, I sat on the sofa, poured myself a glass of water, and unconsciously stared at the coffee table where the marriage certificate lay. It was just a document, nothing flashy, but it carried an Alanan's time, undeniable weight. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a spectacle, but it was enough to change how the world saw me and how I saw myself. I picked it up and opened it again. My name, Kyle's name. 2 lines printed, side by side, perfectly aligned. The seal was ordinary, but it held a striking reality. I looked at it for a long time before closing it and setting it back, down. From this moment on, I was no longer Victor's bride-to-be. I was Kyle's wife. Thinking about that, my heart didn't panic or rebel. It just accepted it, with total clarity, as if I had already walked too far to ever turn back. Around 4 p.m., my burner phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. This time, it was an unknown number. I hesitated for a second before answering. Hello? Tara. The woman's voice was familiar, yet distant. It took me a beat to recognize it. Victor's mother, Eleanor. The line was quiet for a moment before she spoke again, her tone deep but not overly aggressive. Where are you? I stood up, walked to the balcony, and looked down at the traffic below. Where? I am. Does it matter anymore, Eleanor? It matters, she answered firmly. You are the future daughter-in-law of this family. Hearing that, I felt a stab of irony. I was. She sighed heavily over the phone. Tara, I've heard Victor's side of the story. I know he probably framed it to benefit himself. So, you tell me your side. I remained silent for a moment. The afternoon wind blew past, carrying the city's heat gently lifting my hair. Victor brought another woman into the house. He let her stay in my bedroom, use my things, and acted as if it was completely normal, I said slowly. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? She didn't answer immediately. Victor has never done anything this out of line. Before, she finally said. He made a mistake, yes. But not to the point where you had to. Had to what? I countered. Had to make such a rash decision. I chuckled softly. Do you think I'm just throwing a tantrum? I didn't say a tantrum, but you are letting your emotions dictate your actions. I ran out of emotions to dictate my actions a long time ago. That sentence silenced her for a long while. Tara, she called my name, her voice softening. I'm not defending Victor. If he's wrong, I will discipline him. But marriage isn't a trivial matter. You can't just erase everything you two built over one mistake. I leaned against the railing, looking up at the sky, turning amber. I'm not erasing it, I said. What happened, happened. But I don't want to continue. You can give him a chance. And who gives me a chance? The moment the question left my lips, I felt a weight lift off my chest. Some questions don't require an answer from anyone else. Just voicing them is enough. The other side fell silent again. Tara, she said slowly. Victor really does care about you. I laughed under my breath. If that's his version of caring, then your standards and mine are very different. Don't speak like that. I'm only stating facts. My voice wasn't loud, but it was crystal clear. I'm already married, I added. Eleanor seemed to freeze. What did you just say? I registered my marriage this morning. With who? With the man who is now my husband. The line went dead silent. I could clearly hear her breathing heavy and slow. Tara, what on earth are you doing? I'm living my own life. Do you understand how serious this is? I do. Did you think about the consequences? I've been thinking about them since last night. Eleanor seemed to lose her composure. Tara, you are throwing yourself into a rushed, loveless marriage. You will regret this. I looked down at the street, watching a woman walk by holding her young child's probic hand, the kid taking tiny, determined steps. Maybe, I said. But it is my choice. Tara. I cut her off, my voice softening just a fraction. I know you're worried, Eleanor, but there are things I have to take responsibility for myself. She didn't say anything else. After a moment, she only whispered, Take care of yourself. I didn't reply. I just hung up. I stood on the balcony a while longer before stepping back inside. The light in the room had shifted from pale gold to deep orange, stretching the shadows of the furniture across the floor. The day had passed faster than I imagined, yet felt longer than I thought possible. Around 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. I knew who it was. I opened the door. Kyle stood there, still in his suit from the morning, though he had removed his tie, and unbuttoned his collar, making him look slightly less rigid. "Have you eaten dinner?" I asked. "Not yet," he answered. "You?" "Me neither." Kyle nodded and walked in. I brought food. He set 2 heavy paper bags from a high-end restaurant on the counter. The smell wafted out nothing overly extravagant but warm and inviting. I got out plates and silverware. We sat across from each other, not saying much, just eating. After a while, Kyle spoke up. "Did anyone look for you today?" I looked at him. "A few. From Victor's assistant to his mother." Kyle nodded, unfazed. "What did you say?" "I told them I was married." Reactions? "Depends on the person." Kyle didn't press, just picked up more food. We kept eating. When we finished, I cleared the table. Kyle leaned against the wall, watching me for a moment before saying, "I'm staying here tonight." I paused my scrubbing for a beat, then kept washing the dishes. Okay. The atmosphere between us wasn't tense, nor was it awkward. It was just a very natural arrangement, as if this had been predetermined. Once I finished cleaning, I turned around to see Kyle had already taken off his suit jacket, draped it neatly over a chair, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and was standing on the balcony looking out. I walked over and stood beside him. "Do you think everything is moving too fast?" I asked. Kyle didn't look at me, keeping his gaze on the city skyline. "Fast or slow, doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is whether it's right." "And do you think it's right?" He turned and looked me dead in the eye. "I don't do things I believe are wrong." I stayed silent. Perhaps in this marriage, the only thing I could truly lean on right now was his absolute clarity. The night wind blew past, bringing a rare coolness to the city air. I stood there next to the man who had just become my husband, and for the first time all day, I wasn't thinking about Victor anymore. It was just a brief moment, but it was enough to let me know I was truly stepping out of the past. The first night after signing our marriage papers, Kyle and I didn't talk as much as I thought we would. There were no probing questions, no vows or promises, like people usually expect on their first day as husband and wife. Just 2 people stepping into a new relationship, sharing the same space, maintaining enough distance to keep things from getting uncomfortable. I grabbed a thin blanket and draped it over the sofa, turning to him. "You can take the bedroom." Kyle leaned against the doorway, watching me. "And you?" "I'll sleep out here." "Not necessary," he said curtly. I paused. "This is my apartment. As of today, it's not just yours." His statement held no possessiveness, just a very clear statement of fact. I looked at him for a few seconds, then let out a soft sigh. "Then we share the room." Kyle nodded. The air in the bedroom shifted slightly. I opened the closet, grabbed a simple pair of pajamas, and turned away. "Do you need a change of clothes?" I brought my own. He pointed to a duffel bag on the chair. I nodded and headed to the bathroom. Once the door clicked shut, I leaned against the tiled wall and closed my eyes for a second. It wasn't fear. Everything was just so new, and I still needed time to adjust. When I stepped out, Kyle had changed. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and sweatpants standing by the window. His hair was slightly damp, shedding his Barganel 8. Usual sharp corporate armor for a rare, casual normalcy. "You take that side," he said, pointing to the inner half of the bed. "Okay." I walked over, pulled back the covers, and lay down. Kyle turned off the main light, leaving only the dim glow of the nightstand lamp. He lay down on the outer edge. Between us was enough space to ensure we wouldn't accidentally touch. Nobody said another word. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of my own breathing, until the rhythm slowly deepened. After a while, I drifted off without even realizing it. I woke up in the middle of the night, not from a noise, but out of habit. In the past, I used to wake up, check my phone to see if Victor was home yet, or if I had texted. But tonight, when I opened my eyes, I didn't feel the urge to do that anymore. Beside me, Kyle was still asleep. His breathing was steady. He didn't toss or turn. I watched him for a moment before turning over and closing my eyes again. This time, I fell back asleep immediately. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight was already filtering through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the room. I sat up and looked over. Kyle wasn't in bed. The sound of running water echoed from the kitchen. I walked out and saw him standing at the stove. He held a kettle, pouring hot water into a pot. You know how to cook? I asked. Kyle turned his head. I know how to make the basics. What are you making? Oatmeal and eggs. I was slightly surprised. Simple. Unassuming. Kyle looked at me. It's easy on the stomach. I didn't say anything else, just stood there watching him. A man like Kyle, Sterling standing in a small kitchen making oatmeal. If I told anyone in the corporate world, they'd never believe it. A moment later, he plated the food, set it on the table, and poured 2 cups of black coffee. Eat. I sat down, picked up my fork, and took a bite. Mild, but perfectly fine. Not bad, I said. As long as you can eat it. We ate breakfast in silence. The atmosphere wasn't forced, nor was it intimate. It was just a new normal. After eating, Kyle stood up and put his suit jacket back on. I'm heading to the office. Okay. You stay home and take the day off. I don't need a day off. You do, he said firmly. You've been through a lot in 24 hours. Taking 1 day off won't cost you anything. I looked at him, then nodded. All right. Kyle walked to the door, paused for a moment, and said, I'll be home early. Okay. The door closed, leaving the apartment quiet again. I stood there for a minute, before heading to my closet. I didn't want to stay home all day, even though Kyle was right. Some people need to rest when they hurt, but others know that if they stop moving, they'll only overthink. I chose to go out. I drove straight to Victor's company. When I walked into the lobby, the receptionist's eyes widened slightly. The gossip had likely already spread, or maybe it was just my intuition. I gave a Slayersly engine it did. Polite nod and walked straight to the elevator. Up on the executive floor, the vibe was distinctly abnormal. People stared at me longer than usual, but no one dared to speak. Peter practically sprinted out of his office, looking at me like he was seeing a ghost. Tara, you came to the office? I am still the project director, I replied. Why wouldn't I come? Peter swallowed hard. But Victor, what about him? Is he here today? No, he didn't come in. I nodded. Then it's even more crucial someone is here to work. I walked into my office. Everything was exactly as I left it. My desk, my files, my laptop all in place. I put my bag down, sat in my chair, and booted up the Lixgrand computer. Barely 5 minutes later, the door opened. The person who walked in was Mia. She was wearing a tight-fitting designer dress, her hair blown out perfectly, heavy makeup, red lips, and a calculating glint in her eye. Tara, she smiled. You're here? I looked at her without standing up. What are you doing in here? I just wanted to drop by and say hello. Mia closed the door behind her. After all, you were Victor's fiancé. I said nothing. Mia took a step closer, dropping her voice. You moved fast. I thought you'd throw a massive tantrum, but you just packed up and left quietly. I leaned back in my chair. Are you disappointed? Mia laughed. No. I just think you're stronger than I gave you credit for. Is there anything else? Mia tilted her head. Yes, she said. I heard you got married. I looked her dead in the eye. I did. Mia's expression shifted, but only for a split second. You're fast, she smirked. I wonder if this new man is as good as Victor. I stood up. At the very least, he doesn't bring other women into his home. Before the wedding, Mia stiffened. You can leave now, I said calmly. This is my office. Mia clenched her fists, but kept her smile plastered on. Don't think you still have power here, Tara. I haven't resigned, I replied. And no one has told me I don't have power. Mia stared at me for a few seconds before turning on her heel, opening the door, and strutting out. As the door clicked shut, I sat back down, exhaling a soft breath. This war, it seemed, had only just begun. Even after the door closed, the sharp click-clack of Mia's stilettos echoed down the hallway, steady and aggressive, much like the way she stepped into someone else's life without a second thought. I sat at my desk, hands resting on the process surface, staring at the glowing monitor but unable to focus on a single word. That little confrontation didn't anger me. On the contrary, it sobered me up. This were me a month ago. I probably would have felt pain, annoyance, or deeply insulted. But now, standing from an entirely different vantage point, looking back at the whole mess, I only saw one truth clearly. I kept what was worth keeping, and I dropped what needed to be dropped. The rest was none of my business. A knock on the door. "Come in," I said. Peter walked in, closing the door softly. He looked at me, anxiety still, swimming in his eyes. "Tara, are you okay?" "I'm fine." "She just walked out looking pretty sour," Peter muttered. "Do you need me to handle anything?" I shook my head. "No need." Peter hesitated. "Tara, are you seriously planning to keep working here?" I looked at him. "Do you think I should quit?" "Well, yes," Peter rushed out. "It's just, the situation right now is really awkward." "I know," I leaned back. "But I don't have a habit of walking away from half-finished projects." Peter fell silent. "Business is business," I continued. "I won't let personal matters affect it. As for Victor, I don't depend on him." I didn't say that to prove anything to Peter. I said it to remind myself. From the second I walked out of that townhouse, I had severed all ties to Victor, not just emotional ones, but the professional safety nets as well. Peter nodded, still worried. "You have a meeting this afternoon with the partners for the South Side project. Victor usually leads that one." "I'll handle it," I said. Peter opened his mouth as if to argue, then stopped. "Right." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Tara?" "Yeah?" "I'm on your side." I looked at him for a second and gave a slight nod. "Just do your job well." "That's enough." The door closed. I turned back to my monitor and started reviewing the files. The text sharpened, my thoughts aligned. Once a person is no longer dragged around by their emotions, the brain naturally resets to its rightful place. Around noon, I had almost cleared the backlog of work. The intercom buzzed. "Tara, someone is here to see you," the receptionist said. "Who?" "Victor." My pen hovered over my notepad for a beat. "I'm not taking visitors. He's standing right out here." I paused for a few seconds. "Fine. Let him in." Less than a minute later, my office door swung open. Victor stood there. Compared to last night, he looked terrible. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie crooked, his hair unstyled. His eyes were bloodshot not from drinking, but from a total lack of sleep. He stared at me for a long time, as if trying to verify if the woman sitting in front of him was real. "Tara." I didn't stand up. "Can I help you?" That question made his eyes drop. "Let's talk. This isn't a good place for personal chats." "Then let's go somewhere else." "Not necessary." I looked back down at my paperwork, ignoring him. Victor stepped inside and shut the door. "Tara, please stop acting like this." I looked up. "Acting like what, exactly?" He gripped the edge of my desk. "Stop acting so cold." I gave a dry, soft laugh. "Is it strange to you?" "It's strange that you're trying to act like nothing happened." "Because nothing is happening." That sentence made him flinch. "Nothing is happening?" he repeated. 2 years. Together and you just say it's nothing? From the moment you brought her into my home, it became nothing. I told you that was just... Don't. I cut him off. The more you talk, the more I realize I made the exact right decision. Victor took another step, rounding my desk. "Tara, you really got married." "You already know the answer to that." "I don't believe it." "I don't need you to." You are destroying your own life." I looked him dead in the eye. "Do you honestly think I had no other options? Besides you?" He didn't say it, but I knew he thought it. Victor fell silent. I stood up, walked around the desk, and faced him. "Victor, you've always been used to having everything in the palm of your hand," I said slowly. "Your business, your partners, your women. Everything revolved around you. Tara." "But not this time." I stared right at him. "I am no longer orbiting you." That statement sliced through the air like a blade. Victor clenched his jaw, his eyes reddening. "I don't accept this. I don't require your acceptance. Tara, you are my fiancé. We were. You never called off the engagement, so I did. I don't agree to it. I don't need your agreement." The air in the room turned suffocatingly heavy. Victor stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Who is the guy?" "I don't have to answer that. I have a right to know. You have no rights over me whatsoever." That snapped him rigid. "Tara." He choked on my name, his voice turning gravelly. "Do you really have absolutely zero feelings left for me?" I looked at him for a long, long time. "I do." A spark of hope flashed in his eyes. "But they aren't for you anymore." The faint smile that had just begun to form in his eyes vanished instantly. "Go home," I said. "Don't make this ugly for both of us." "I'm not leaving. This is my company, not your house." I am the CEO. And I am the project director, I replied, entirely unbothered. We both have our titles. Let's not use our titles to settle personal vendettas. Victor stared at me, his expression a tangled mess of emotions. You've changed. I've just returned to who I was. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, Victor turned away. Tara, this isn't over. I didn't reply. He opened the door and walked out. I stood there for a few seconds before returning to my chair. Outside, the hallway went quiet. I picked up my pen and went back to reading, as if the conversation had never happened. But deep down, I knew that from this moment on, everything was shifting into a player's new phase. This was no longer just a breakup, this was a collision. The heavy atmosphere left by Victor lingered in my office. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, my mind entirely blank. Not because his words swayed me, but because I realized a harsh truth. Some people only start to understand what is happening the moment they lose it entirely. But by the time they understand, it is always too late. I took a deep breath, recalibrated my focus, and forced myself back into the spreadsheets. Not to prove a point, but because I refused to stop moving. Stopping meant allowing useless thoughts to creep in. At 2 p.m., Peter knocked. Tara, Mr. Harrison and the partners are in the Paldersleys conference room. I'll be right there. I stood up, smoothed my blazer, grabbed my iPad and notes, and walked out. The hallway looked normal, but people's eyes seemed to linger on me just a second too long. Clearly, the confrontation with Victor wasn't as discreet as I'd hoped. In corporate spaces like this, private matters rarely stay private. Entering the conference room, Mr. Harrison and his team were already seated. He was a man in his 50s, cautious, conservative, and rarely changed his mind. Without seeing a solid profit margin. Good afternoon, Tara. He stood up to shake my hand. Good afternoon, Mr. Harrison. We sat down and the meeting began. At first, everything went smoothly. I presented the timeline, the risk analysis, the ROI projections, and the deployment strategy. Every metric, every detail was firmly under my control. Work, at least for now, was the only thing I could hold on to securely. But midway through, Mr. Harrison suddenly asked, I don't see Victor today. I paused for a microsecond. He's tied up with other matters. He nodded, but his eyes narrowed slightly. I've heard rumors of some shifts within your firm lately. I assure you, nothing will affect this project, I stated clearly. All commitments remain intact. Mr. Harrison stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded. I hope so. The meeting continued, but I felt it clearly. When personal lives shift, professional capabilities are suddenly viewed through a filter of skepticism. No matter how competent I was, outside noise was bleeding in. After wrapping up, I walked Mr. Harrison out to the elevators. When I returned, Peter was loitering near my door, looking stressed. What is it? I asked. Peter looked around, lowering his voice. Mia just went into the CEO's office. Let her. But, Peter hesitated. She called me in and told me that from now on, all project files need to go through her desk first. I whipped my head toward him. Did you agree? I didn't know what to say. Good. I started walking. Tara, Peter called out. I'll handle it. I marched straight to the CEO's suite. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy oak. Doors open. Mia was sitting behind Victor's massive desk, legs crossed, scrolling on her phone. A stack of unread reports sat in front of her. She looked up, saw me, and a smile instantly bloomed. Tara, I didn't think you'd know your way up here anymore. You're sitting in the wrong chair, I said. Not necessarily, Mia tilted her head. Victor said from now on I'll be assisting him with company management. I haven't seen an official memo. Not everything requires a piece of paper, she countered. I looked her dead in the eye. Here, it does. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Mia set her phone down and leaned back in the executive leather chair. Tara, how long do you really plan to cling to? Your title? As long as I see fit. Do you honestly think you can survive here? I don't think it, I do it. Mia's smile faded, her eyes turning cold. Don't you feel completely out of place? I've never belonged to a place enough to feel out of it. My answer made her falter for a second. You really are different now. I have always been this way. I slapped a file down on the desk. These documents are strictly for authorized personnel. You don't have clearance. Mia looked at the file, then back at me. I have clearance. What is your title in this corporation? The direct question shut her up. I am Victor's, she stopped. In this building, there are only titles. Not relationships, I said distinctly. If you don't have a title, you have zero authority. Mia gripped the armrests. Don't think you can bully me. I'm not bullying you. I'm stating corporate policy. A long, tense silence stretched out. Finally, Mia stood up. You're going to have to leave eventually. Maybe, I said, but it won't be because of you. Mia glared at me for a few seconds, grabbed her phone, and stormed out of the office. The door clicked shut. I stood there for a moment before pulling out the executive chair and sitting down. Not to stake a claim on Victor's desk, but to review the files she had been hoarding. I flipped through the pages, correcting errors with a red pen, treating the desk as nothing more than a slab of wood, meant for work. A few minutes later, the door opened again. It was Victor. He stood in the doorway, staring at me sitting behind his desk, his expression incredibly complicated. What are you doing in here? Working. This is your office. This is a workspace. I didn't bother looking up. Victor walked in and closed the door. Tara, what are you trying to pull? I'm trying to keep your company from imploding. That made him stop in his tracks. You think I can't manage my own firm? I think you're letting your emotions dictate your business. Victor went silent. You used to be clinical about separating the two, I continued. Now, you aren't. You don't have the right to lecture me. I have a responsibility to my projects. I finally looked up at him. If you want this company to survive the quarter, stop letting unauthorized people interfere with operations. Victor clenched his fists. You're talking about Mia. I'm talking about anyone without an official title. Silence. Victor stared at me for a very long time. Tara, are you really never coming back? I stood up. You've already asked me that. I want to hear it again. I looked at him. No. Just one word, but absolute. Victor squeezed his eyes shut for a second, then opened them. Fine, he said. Then from now on, we are strictly business. Partners. I never saw it any other way. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but there was no joy in it. You really are. Ruthless. I'm just being fair. I picked up my files, walked around the desk, and headed for the door. I didn't look back. I knew that if I looked back, I might see things I shouldn't see, and I had zero intention of ever turning around again. That afternoon, after leaving the CEO's suite, I didn't go straight back to my placid office. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in the hallway, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The sun cast a long shadow of my silhouette across the polished floor. I felt a stark realization. From this moment on, the fragile balance was gone. Victor was no longer keeping his distance. Mia was openly showing her ambition, and whether I wanted to or not, I was firmly planted on the opposing side. I returned to my office, set the files down, and was about to type an email when my desk phone rang. Tara, someone is here to see you, the receptionist said. Who? Victor's mother. I paused. Is she in the lobby? Yes. I took a breath. Tell her I'll be right down. I stood up, adjusted my blazer, and walked out. The hallways were quieter now. Entering the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored doors. Calm, collected, showing no signs of the storm raging around me, but only I knew that the waters weren't entirely still. The elevator dinged at the lobby. I stepped out and saw Eleanor sitting in the guest waiting area. She wore a chic cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, her hair perfectly coiffed, her posture immaculate. She possessed the intimidating aura of an old money matriarch who was entirely used to controlling every variable in her life. I walked over. Hello, Eleanor. She looked up at me. Her gaze lingered a bit longer than usual, as if evaluating a completely different person. Sit down, she said. I sat across from her. You've lost weight, she noted. I'm fine, I replied. She let out a faint sigh. Tara, I never thought you would take things this far. I didn't think I would either. Do you realize how many things your actions are destabilizing right now? I do. And yet you still did it. I had no other choice. She frowned slightly. No other choice, or you didn't want to make another Everbuck. Choice? I looked at her. If you were me, Eleanor, would you have chosen to stay? She fell silent. I'm not asking as your former prospective daughter-in-law, I added. I'm asking as a woman. She stared at me for a long time. Women don't always get the luxury of choosing based on their feelings, she finally said. I didn't choose based on my feelings. Then what did you choose based on? Self-respect. That answer stunned her. Self-respect? She repeated. You think walking out like that preserves your self-respect? I think staying would have destroyed it. The air between us grew heavy. She elegantly crossed her legs, resting her hands on her knees. Tara, I'm not excusing Victor's behavior, but a mistake is a mistake. You fix it. You don't just throw the whole thing away. I am not a broken appliance to be fixed and reused. Tara, I don't blame you, Eleanor, I interrupted, keeping my tone respectful but unyielding, and I don't even blame him anymore, but I cannot go back. She looked at me, her eyes clouded with complexity. You actually got married. I did. To whom? His name is Kyle. She frowned, searching her memory. Kyle? From the Sterling Group? Yes. Her demeanor shifted dramatically. Do you have any idea what you're getting yourself into? I do. Are you not afraid? I have nothing left to be afraid of. A long silence stretched between us. She leaned back against the lounge chair, exhaling a long breath. You are impossibly stubborn. I just stopped being soft. She looked at me, then asked suddenly, Do you even love him? I stayed quiet. I don't know. It was still the most honest answer. She scoffed lightly. You don't know, yet you dared to marry him? I know he won't betray me. That single sentence silenced her completely. Perhaps, for a woman who had seen it all, she understood the immense value of something so fundamentally simple. Tara, she said, her voice finally softening. Have you thought about your future? I'm living in the present. The present will pass, but if the present is built on a mistake, the future will collapse. She didn't say anything more. A moment later, she stood up. Since your mind is made up, I won't force you, she said. But don't think any of this is going to be easy. I never thought it would be. She nodded. Take care of yourself. You too. She turned and walked out of the glass doors. Her posture was still rigid, but her steps seemed a fraction slower than when she arrived. I watched her go, then turned back to the elevators. It was only when I stepped inside that I realized my hands were ice cold, not from fear, but because that conversation had dug much deeper than I expected. Not everyone would understand my choice, and perhaps many never would, but that no longer mattered. Back in my office, my phone buzzed the second I sat down. It was Kyle. I'm done with work, he said. Where are you? At the office. I'll come pick you up. I can take a cab. No need. His tone was casual but brokered no argument. I let out a soft breath. Fine. I'll be down in 20 minutes. I'll be waiting. He hung up. I looked at the clock. 20 minutes wasn't long, but it was enough to compartmentalize my thoughts. I shut down my computer, organized my desk, and headed downstairs. When I walked out of the building, Kyle's car was already idling at the curb. He stood leaning against the door. Seeing me, he opened the passenger side. I thought I said 20 minutes. I'm early. I didn't mind. I didn't ask further and got in. The car pulled into traffic. Did something happen today? Kyle asked after a while. I met with Victor's mother. What did she say? Depends on how you look at it. I stared out the window. It was fine. Kyle didn't pry. The silence between us wasn't suffocating. It was a much-needed mental break. When we arrived at my apartment building, I got out, and Kyle followed me up. Walking inside, I kicked off my heels and dropped my bag. Kyle stood behind me, watching for a moment before speaking. Tonight, I'm telling my family. I turned around. Telling them what? About our marriage? I stayed quiet. Prepare yourself mentally. I gave a small nod. Okay. This, I realized, was just the beginning. That evening, the apartment was quieter than usual. After Kyle mentioned telling his family, he didn't bring it up again. I didn't ask either. Between us, there was an unspoken understanding. What needs to be done, each will handle on their own, without needing endless explanations. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out some simple ingredients. Not because I was starving, but because I needed to do something with my hands to keep my mind from wandering too far. Kyle, who had been on his phone in the living room, hung up and walked into the first liaison. Kitchen, what are you making? Something simple. I'll help. I glanced at him. You actually know your way around a kitchen? I'm no chef, but I won't burn the place down. I smiled faintly. Wash the greens then. Kyle took the colander without a word and stood at the sink. A man like him, standing in a small kitchen doing such mundane chores if you had told my past self this would happen, I would have thought it was absurd. But right now, it felt bizarrely natural. We didn't talk much while cooking. Just the sound of running water, the knife, hitting the cutting board, the soft bubbling of a pot, small noises that comfortably filled the silence. When the food was ready, we sat across from each other. Nothing fancy, just a few home-cooked dishes, but it made me feel more at ease than any ticturlies than any. Michelin-starred meal I'd had recently. Is your family strict? I asked. Kyle looked at me. Strict in their own way. Meaning, they don't care who you are. They only care if you are suitable. I'm not sure I'm suitable. You don't need to be sure, he said bluntly. You just need to not back down. I went silent. The hardest part wasn't facing his powerful family. It was facing myself in this new role. Playing the wife to a man I never imagined binding. Myself too in this way. After dinner, Kyle helped me clear the table, then stepped out onto the balcony to make a call. I couldn't hear his exact words, but his tone was deep, steady, and unyielding. The kind of voice that lets the listener know his decision is final. About 10 minutes later, he came back inside. I told them. Their reaction? Normal. I raised an eyebrow. Normal? They want to meet you. When? Tomorrow. I paused. That fast? There's no reason to delay. I nodded, though a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Not fear, just the weight of preparation. Do I need to prep anything? I asked. Just be yourself. The most cliché answer, but probably the most accurate. That night, we shared the bed again. The distance between us didn't feel as vast as the first night. Not physically closer, but the awkwardness had dissipated. I lay on my side, my back to him, staring into the dark room. Kyle. Yeah. If your family doesn't accept me tomorrow. What then? A brief pause. Then that's their problem. As for me, I'm already married. That answer effectively shut down any further questions. Kyle wasn't a man, swayed by other people's opinions, and that gave me a solid sliver of peace. The next morning, I woke up naturally, early. I sat up and looked out the gridio window. New York was waking up, but inside I was preparing for a very different kind of day. I chose an elegant, understated dress, applied light makeup not to impress, but to ensure I felt confident in my own skin. When I walked into the living room, Kyle was ready. Let's go. The drive out of the city and up toward Connecticut was smooth. I looked out the Commer window, trying to keep my mind blank. You don't need to be tense, Kyle said. I'm not. Your knuckles are white. I looked down at my hands and forced them to relax. Habit. 30 minutes later, we pulled through the wrought iron gates of a massive estate. It wasn't flashy or gaudy, just vast, secluded, with impeccably manicured lawns and old-growth trees. Old money. I stepped out of the car and stared at the front doors. This is your house. Yeah. And the first time I've ever brought a woman here in this capacity. I looked at him. Are you saying that to make me feel better? No, just stating a fact. I nodded, and we walked inside. In the grand living room, two people were already seated. An older man with a proster, severe posture and sharp eyes, Kyle's father. Next to him, a woman with a serene, but entirely unreadable expression, his mother. I paused for a beat. Mom, Dad, Kyle greeted them. They looked at me. This is Tara. I stepped forward and gave a polite, respectful nod. Mr. Sterling. Mrs. Sterling. No one replied immediately. The air grew thick. Mrs. Sterling looked me up and down. It wasn't a glare, but a thorough appraisal. Sit down, she finally said. I sat, keeping my back straight, hands resting gracefully on my lap. After a long stretch of silence, his father spoke. When did you and Kyle get married? Yesterday morning. He nodded slowly, fast. Yes. He locked eyes with me. Do you think this was the right decision? I think it's a decision I must take responsibility for. He didn't say anything else. His mother chimed in. How long have you known Kyle? Not long. Then why marry him? I paused for exactly 1 second. Because I trust him. That answer caught her slightly off guard. Trust? She repeated. How much do you actually know about Kyle? I know he is not a man who betrays. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. His father glanced at Kyle, then back. At me. Are you aware of the complexities of the Sterling family? I know some. This family is not simple. I don't need simple, I answered firmly. Mrs. Sterling looked at me much closer now. You aren't afraid. I've already survived much scarier things. That left both of them in silence. Kyle sat beside me the entire time, staring. Straight ahead, not interfering once. After a few moments, his father stood up. You'll stay for lunch? It wasn't a question. I nodded. Yes, thank you. His mother didn't add anything, but the edge in her eyes had dulled. I knew this. Wasn't total acceptance, but it was no longer outright rejection. And that was a massive step forward. Lunch was a quiet affair. The only sounds were the faint clinking of silverware against fine china. Amidst the silence, I could feel Mrs. Sterling's gaze, landing on me periodically, less analytical now, but still assessing. I sat straight, ate slowly, and didn't force any unnatural conversation. Sometimes, graceful restraint is the best way to maintain boundaries. You work at Victor's firm? Mr. Sterling asked, his voice a low rumble. Yes, as a project director. He nodded. Is it stable? It is. Do you plan to stay? I paused, chewing my food carefully before answering. I am currently evaluating my options. Mrs. Sterling set her fork down. You should resign. I looked at her. Why is that? It is no longer appropriate for you to be there. She spoke with absolute certainty, not just because of the personal history, but because of the environment. I understand. And if I understand, I should cut ties. I stayed quiet for a few seconds. But I don't have a habit of abandoning half-finished work. Mrs. Sterling looked at me, a flicker of displeasure in her eyes, though she didn't outright object. Some things are not worth holding on to. I am not holding on to it for someone else, I replied calmly. I am holding on to it for my own career. She didn't argue further. Kyle sat next to me, remaining completely silent. Let me answer for myself, fight my own battles. Strangely, that made me feel more respected than if he had jumped in to shield me. He trusted I could hold my ground. After the meal, Mrs. Sterling stood up to go into the kitchen. Out of habit, I stood up as well. Let me help you. She glanced at me. Not necessary. I can manage. I insist, I said softly, following her anyway. The kitchen was massive but felt quieter. I stood beside her, clearing plates and bringing them to the sink. She didn't stop me, just handed me items, occasionally. You aren't what I expected, she said after a while. What did you expect me to be like? Impulsive, reckless. I wasn't impulsive, I said. I just refused to wait any longer. She fell silent. Do you know Kyle isn't an easy man to live with? I know a bit. He isn't the type to cater to emotions. And I don't need anyone to cater to mine. That answer made her stop and look at me. You speak very directly. I've never been good at beating around the bush. A moment of silence passed. She sighed softly. Is it truly over between you and Victor? I stopped wiping the counter for a second. It's over. No regrets. I did all my regretting already. She studied my face for a long moment. Women don't always get the chance to start over. I don't view this as starting over, I said. I view it as moving forward. That phrase seemed to soften her gaze significantly. You can go back to the living room, she said. I don't need your help in here anymore. Yes, ma'am. I dried my hands and walked out. Kyle was on the patio talking to his father. I didn't approach them, just sat on the sofa looking out at the sprawling lawns. Every hedge was pruned with mathematical precision. This family didn't accept sudden disruptions easily. Eventually, Kyle came back inside. Done? He asked. I think we survived. Kyle nodded. That's enough. Before we left, his father called us over. Head back early today, he commanded. Don't give outsiders an excuse to gossip. Understood, Kyle said. I nodded. Thank you. It wasn't just casual advice. It was a reminder that from now on, Kyle and I were a united front in the eyes of New York high society. In the car ride back to the city, the afternoon traffic was heavier. The sun was still bright, but the heat had broken. How do you feel? Kyle asked. It wasn't easy, I admitted. Yeah, but it wasn't as hard as you thought because you didn't back down. I chuckled. You always say that. Because it's true. I didn't argue. When we got back to the apartment, My phone rang the second I walked through the door. It was Peter. Tara, he sounded panicked. We have a problem. What is it? The South Side project has been suspended. I froze. By who? Victor? Yes. He said he needs to reevaluate everything. I don't know the details, but it feels like it's aimed at you. I gripped the phone tighter. Are you going into the office? Peter asked, nervously. No. Tell him I don't make decisions based on emotional outbursts, I said, slowly. Keep everything as is. Don't sign anything, don't change anything. If, he asks, tell him I will handle him directly. Got it. I hung up and stood frozen in the hallway. Kyle looked at me. Trouble? I'm being dragged into a mess. Work? Yes. Kyle nodded. Can you handle it? I will handle it. Need my help? I looked at him. Not yet. Suit yourself. He didn't pry or insist. He just trusted me 3 simple words, but they meant everything. I walked into the living room and sat down. This wasn't a defensive play anymore. This was preparation for war. Victor was making his move, attacking not my feelings but my career. And I knew this battle wouldn't be fought with just words. That night, after hanging up with Peter, I didn't react immediately. I sat quietly on the sofa, hands clasped, staring at a blank spot on the wall. If you react instinctively to an attack, you fall right into the opponent's trap. And Victor had always been a master at setting traps. I'm going to the office, I announced a while later. Kyle turned from the balcony. Now? No. Tomorrow morning. What are you going to do tonight? Think. Kyle nodded. All right. The way he let me handle my own crisis made me realize something. He wasn't the kind of man to swoop in and play the hero. He was the kind of man who stood right behind you, close enough that if you needed to fall back, he'd catch you. I stayed up late that night. I opened my laptop and reviewed the entire South Side project file. Every clause, every timeline, every financial projection, it was flawless. There was zero business justification for halting it, unless the reason wasn't business at all. Around 1 a.m., I closed my laptop. I had a plan. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The moment I walked into the lobby, the tension in the air was palpable. It wasn't just whispers. It was the suffocating anticipation of a bomb going off. I walked straight to my office. Peter was waiting. Tara, what's the play? He handed me an internal memo. South Side project. Suspended indefinitely. I glanced at it and tossed it on my desk. How did the partners react? Mr. Harrison is demanding an explanation. Good. Peter looked shocked. Good? At least they aren't staying quiet. I dropped my bag on the chair. Set up a meeting in the main conference room. Invite Mr. Harrison's team, Victor, and Mia. Peter choked. Mia too? Yes. I don't do things behind people's backs. Right away. Less than an hour later, the boardroom was set. I walked in and took my usual seat. Mr. Harrison and his team arrived shortly after. He looked incredibly tense. Tara, what the hell is going on? We'll clear everything up right now, I said smoothly. The doors opened. Victor walked in. He wore a sharp, tailored suit, looking Lord suit, entirely different from his disheveled state yesterday. His eyes had regained their cold, calculating edge. Right behind him was Mia. She walked in, threw me a smug look, and sat right next to Victor without a shred of hesitation. I scanned the room. Let's begin. Nobody spoke. I slid a thick file across the table toward Mr. Harrison. This project has hit every milestone. Financially and operationally, it is pristine, I stated. The sudden suspension has absolutely nothing to do with professional adapted metrics. Mr. Harrison looked sharply at Victor. Victor, explain. Victor leaned back, unbothered. We need to conduct a thorough internal review. Review of what? Harrison snapped. I need specifics. Victor stayed silent. There are no specifics, I interjected. All eyes snapped to me. I have audited the entire project, I continued. There is zero justifiable reason to halt construction. Tara. Victor's voice was a low warning. This is an executive decision. Then as the executive, you owe the board an explanation. The room grew incredibly hostile. Mia suddenly spoke up, her voice light but piercing. Tara, executives make calls they don't have to explain to every subordinate. I locked eyes with her. In this room, an explanation is mandatory. You're just trying to make Victor look bad. I am trying to protect a multi-million-dollar project. Mia smirked. Or maybe you're just trying to protect your own fragile ego? I didn't miss a beat. I don't need to protect something I built from the ground. Up. That shut her up. Mr. Harrison slammed his hand on the mahogany table. I don't give a damn about your domestic disputes, he barked. I only care if this project is moving. Forward or not. Victor looked at him. It is temporarily paused. For how long? Undetermined. Mr. Harrison stood up. Then we are pulling our funding. The room went dead silent. Mr. Harrison, I called out. He stopped. I will take full responsibility for this project. Victor glared at me. You don't have the authority. I have the responsibility. I am the one who makes the final call. I can kill this project, Victor. Sneered. You can try, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. But I will finish. The silence in the boardroom was deafening. Tara, Victor's eyes narrowed into slits. You're overstepping. I can do this without me. I never needed you to do the works. I only needed you not to stand in the way. A heavy, suffocating tension filled the air. Finally, Mr. Harrison spoke. I will give you 3 days. I don't need 3 days, I replied immediately. I will have a restructuring proposal for you by tomorrow morning. He nodded once. Done. He walked out. Mia glared at me, her mask of sweetness totally gone. You're digging your own. Grave. I know exactly what I'm doing. I wouldn't be so sure. I don't need you to be sure. Mia gripped her purse. You're going to regret this. I'm long past the phase of regrets. She stood up, shoved her chair back, and stormed out. Only Victor and I were left in the boardroom. He stood there, staring at me as if I were a stranger. What the hell do you think you're doing? I'm doing my job. You are declaring war on me. You fired the first shot. Tara, his voice dropped, a mix of anger and pleading. You don't have to push things this far. I'm not pushing anything, I said, gathering my papers. I'm just refusing to. Stay stagnant. He stared at me for a long, painful minute. Are you truly not afraid of losing everything? I already lost the only thing that mattered, I said plainly. What's left is mine. That effectively silenced him. He had no counter-argument. I picked up my files and stood up. If you want to halt the project on your end, go ahead, I said. But I won't stop. I walked out of the boardroom. This time, no one called me back. We all knew I was no longer in a position to be kept. After that meeting, I didn't go back to my office. I took the elevator straight, down to the parking garage and stood next to my car. Not because I was exhausted, but because I needed a moment of absolute silence to organize the chaos in my head. What I just did wasn't impulsive, but it was a massive gamble. I knew that the moment I promised to continue the project, I had burned my only bridge back. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I got into the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. My phone, resting on the passenger seat, lit up. It was Kyle. Done? He asked. Done. The outcome? I'm taking the project solo. A brief pause on the line. Good. Just one word. But it carried immense weight. Aren't you going to ask if I'm sure I can pull this off? I asked. I don't need to ask, Kyle said. You aren't the type to make empty threats. I leaned my head back against the headrest. I might lose everything this time. Lose what? Your job? Everything. Your perspective is flawed, his deep voice resonated through the speaker. The only way you lose is if you go back. I fell silent. It wasn't comfort. It was the brutal truth. Come home, he said. Take the night off. Okay. I hung up, started the car, and drove out of the garage. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. The Manhattan streets were choked with rush-hour traffic, the late afternoon sun glaring off the skyscrapers, but inside my mind, everything was crystal clear. I was no longer trapped between two choices. I had picked my path, and I was going to walk it to the very end. When I walked into the apartment that night, Kyle was already there. He didn't ask me for a play-by-play of the boardroom bloodbath. He just looked at me and asked, "Did you eat?" "No." "Sit." He had takeout waiting from a quiet Italian place. I sat down and ate slowly. The silence was comforting. Halfway through the meal, I spoke. I'm resigning from his company. Kyle didn't look up from his plate. I figured. No point dragging it out. What's your next move? I'm taking the Southside project and executing it independently. Kyle paused for a microsecond. Do you have the capital and resources? I do. Are you certain? I'm never completely certain, I admitted, but I'm going to make it happen. Kyle nodded. If you need anything, say the word. Not yet. Your call. That night, I slept incredibly well. No dreams, no waking up in cold sweats. Maybe when a person finally accepts every possible worst-case scenario, there's nothing left to fear. 3 days later, I submitted my resignation. No dramatics. No long-winded exit. Interviews. Just a standard, one-page letter. When I placed it on Victor's desk, he stared at it for a long time, refusing to sign it. Are you seriously taking it this far? He asked. Yes. You could stay. I don't want to. Tara, his voice cracked slightly. We don't have to be enemies. We aren't enemies, I replied calmly. We just aren't on the same side. Anymore. He gripped his luxury pen tightly. You'll regret this. You've said that before. Has it been true yet? I looked at him. This time is my choice. Victor didn't say anything else. Finally, he signed it. I took the paper and walked out. That was the last time I ever stepped out of that office as an employee. After that, everything moved at breakneck speed. I leveraged every ounce of my experience, my industry contacts, and the capital I had secretly accrued to spin the Southside project into my own independent venture. I no longer had a massive corporate logo behind me, but I had something I never had before. Absolute freedom. Kyle didn't intervene, but he was always there. He didn't micromanage my steps or check in constantly. He just dropped brief, razor-sharp pieces of advice. Exactly when I hit a wall. There were moments I realized I was learning more from him, not just about real estate, but about how to view the world than I ever had in an MBA program. A month later, the project was officially greenlit. Not under Victor's company, but under my newly formed LLC. The day we signed the contracts, I stood in the lobby of Mr. Harrison's corporate headquarters, holding the pen, and signed my own name. There was no applause, no champagne popping, but inside, a profound realization washed over me. This was what I was actually capable of. When I walked out the revolving doors, Kyle was leaning against his car, waiting. Done? He asked. Done. How does it feel? I looked at him and smiled softly. Liberating. Kyle nodded. Then it was the right move. We got into the car. On the drive back, I suddenly looked over at him. Do you ever wonder what would have happened to me if I hadn't called you that night? Kyle didn't answer immediately. I do, he said after a moment. But it doesn't matter. Why not? Because you did call me. I laughed lightly. You are incredibly arrogant. No, he replied, eyes on the road. I just state facts. I didn't argue, because he was right. That evening, I stood on the balcony of our apartment looking down at the city. The lights of Manhattan flickered to life, the endless streams of yellow cabs, and headlights moving like rivers below. Everything was exactly the same as it had always been, except for me. I was completely different. I thought back to that night, standing outside the master bedroom, hearing Mia's laughter and Victor saying, "You're staying here." If I had chosen to stay, I would still be living in a multi-million-dollar townhouse. I would still be the fiancé of a wealthy, successful man. I would have everything that people on the outside looked at with envy. But I knew, deep down, I would have been a hollow shell. Now, I didn't have the townhouse. I didn't have the grand society wedding. But I had something infinitely more valuable. I had myself. Kyle stepped out onto the balcony and stood beside me. What are you thinking? About? I'm thinking about how far I've come. You're gonna go much further. I don't know for sure. I do, he said simply. I looked at him and smiled. Then, let's keep going. The night breeze swept past, carrying the cool air off the Hudson River. I stood there, stripped of all regrets, devoid of any sense of loss. All that remained was a profound, unshakable peace. Sometimes, losing something isn't the end of the story, it's the prologue to a better one. There are stories that, once told, you don't immediately want to put away. Because what lingers isn't the plot itself, but the feeling it leaves behind. The feeling of someone who loved to their absolute limits. Someone who once believed that as long as they were good enough, patient enough, everything would have a fairy tale ending. But life doesn't always operate on that logic. If you look at this story simply, it's just a breakup. One person leaves, one stays, one interrupts. It's a tale so common we've all heard it, seen it, maybe, even lived it. But what makes this story different isn't that she left a cheating man, it's how she left. No screaming, no begging, no tearing the house apart to reclaim something that no longer belonged to her. She chose silence, and she used her own success as her answer. People often mistake strength for the ability to defeat others. True strength is realizing you no longer need to compete with anyone. She didn't look back, didn't ask why, didn't wait for an apology. Because deep down, she knew that some questions only bring pain, and holding on only brings more loss. So, she let go. Not out of weakness, but out of a sobering clarity about what she deserved. And then she started over, not with a desperate rebound for love, but by building a completely new version of herself. That is the true victory. In this life, you will meet many people. Some will come to love you. Some will come to teach you a lesson, and some will come to show you that you can never place your entire existence into the hands of another human being. The only thing you can ever truly rely on is yourself. So, if one day you find yourself standing in front of a door just like she did, one side holding the familiar, the past, the things you thought would last forever, and the other holding the unknown, the isolation, the terrifying prospect of starting from scratch, I hope you have the courage to choose yourself. Because in the end, the winner isn't the one who stays. The winner is the one who has the bravery to walk away when their heart no longer belongs in that room. The story ends here, but the journey for each of us continues. And perhaps, after hearing this, you'll realize a very simple but incredibly difficult truth. True happiness isn't about managing to keep someone else. It's about never losing yourself for anyone.